A rich man promised nothing to a woman in Alaska, yet kept showing up. Why would a man with nothing to prove arrive every week and leave without asking to be seen? Why would a woman who needs help the most refuse to look for his face once he is gone? Somewhere inside that silence, something unsettled has already begun. Lena Harper had learned to live without witnesses. That was not a principle. It was a condition. Out here, survival depended on doing what needed to be done without expecting anyone to notice. She split her own firewood. She patched her own roof. She learned when to speak to the radio and when not to bother. Help, when it came, usually arrived late, loud, or with a price. So she stopped waiting for it. On this morning, the problem was simple and unsolved. Her generator had been coughing for days, the kind of sound that did not promise repair, only delay. She had calculated the hours in her head already. Heat would last through the night, maybe the next. After that, decisions would have to change. She finished shoveling the last drift from the front steps and stood still longer than necessary, catching her breath. That pause was when she noticed it, a shape where there had not been one before. Not close, not touching the cabin, set just far enough to avoid presumption. A wooden crate rested on the snow like it had been measured there. Clean edges, no footprints leading up to the door. Whoever placed it had not wanted to cross the line. Lena did not approach right away. She scanned the tree line, the road that curved away from the cabin, the pale sky pressing low over the hills. Nothing moved. No engine sound fading. No door left ajar. Alaska did not give up information freely, and she had learned not to demand it. When she finally knelt, the crate did not resist. Inside were things chosen by someone who paid attention. Dry food, batteries, a small box of cold medicine. All practical, nothing indulgent, nothing labeled. There was no note. She carried the crate inside, set it by the wall, and shut the door. The lock slid home with its familiar weight. Whatever question had arrived with the box did not leave with the cold. Outside, the road remained empty. An hour later, from the window, she saw the truck. It was already turning around. The pickup was dark, unremarkable, the kind used by men who preferred equipment over statements. It did not idle. It did not stop. It completed its slow arc and headed back the way it came, tires finding the same grooves in the packed snow. Lena watched until the tail lights disappeared behind a bend. She did not wave. She did not step outside. She did not chase answers that did not belong to her yet. Inside the cabin, the generator coughed again, then steadied. Heat filled the space in increments she trusted more than hope. She unpacked the crate and placed each item where it would be used, not where it would be seen. Only after everything was put away did she return to the window. The road was empty. The sky had shifted, clouds thickening the way they did before weather decided to make itself known. The timing felt deliberate in a way she could not name. Not the storm, the delivery. Somewhere beyond the trees, Daniel Frost continued driving. He did not check the mirror. He had done this before. Same day of the week. Same hour. He had learned that consistency did more work than explanation ever could. The crate in the bed of his truck was gone now, but the space it left behind was familiar. He adjusted his gloves, kept his eyes on the road, and let the distance rebuild itself. He had promised nothing. That was the point. Back at the cabin, Lena pulled on her coat and stepped outside again, just long enough to look at the place where the crate had been. The snow already showed signs of erasing it. By tomorrow, there would be no proof it had ever been there at all. She stood there, listening to the quiet return to normal. Whatever this was, it had arrived without asking permission, and it had left without waiting for gratitude. That timing, more than the object itself, was what stayed with her. Morning returned the way it always did, without ceremony. Cold came first, pressing against the cabin walls before light arrived to soften it. The stove had burned low overnight, embers holding just enough heat to keep the room from turning brittle. Lena Harper rose before the temperature could make the decision for her. She moved through the narrow, spaced by memory, boots by the door, kettle on the burner, coffee grounds measured without looking. Outside, the world waited. Snow covered everything that had once been sharp. The road was a pale ribbon cut through trees that did not lean toward it. No tracks from the night. No sign that anyone else had passed through. Alaska did not acknowledge effort unless it had to. She poured hot water slowly, letting steam fill the room. The window above the sink had frosted into patterns she never bothered to clear completely. A partial view was enough. Too much visibility could turn into distraction. The husky stirred near the stove, lifting its head at the sound of the kettle. Old habits. It did not bark. It did not rush her. It only waited, tail tapping the floor once, then still. After coffee, she pulled on her coat and stepped outside. The cold took hold immediately, clean and exact. Her breath came out white, then disappeared. The trees stood close but not crowded, trunks dark against the snow. Somewhere deeper in the forest, something shifted, then went quiet again. That was all Alaska ever offered by way of greeting. She checked the generator. Still running. Still holding. The crate from yesterday was already gone from her thoughts, folded into the same place as other things that arrived without explanation. Weather did that. So did solitude. Questions learned to settle or freeze. Her routine carried her forward. Split wood. Clear the path from door to shed. Walk the edge of the property where the snow drifted highest. The husky followed, stopping where it always did, nose to the wind, ears alert but relaxed. By mid-morning, light had settled into the cabin. Not bright, not dim, the kind that made objects feel steady. Lena hung wet gloves by the stove and laid out tools on the table, checking each one before putting it away. Order was not preference. It was insurance. Inside was warm now. Outside remained undecided. She took the narrow trail behind the cabin just before noon, skis strapped to her pack, boots crunching softly with each step. This was not a journey. It was a loop she had walked 100 times, enough to stretch the body, enough to remind the land she was still here. The trees closed in slightly, branches heavy with snow. The wind moved above her, not around. Her, brushing the tops of the forest like a thought not meant to interrupt. She followed her own tracks until they disappeared under fresh powder. When she returned, the light had already begun to change. That was when she saw the truck again. It was parked farther back this time, near the curve where the road dipped out of sight. Not close enough to assume. Not far enough to pretend it was passing through. The engine was off. No door open. No movement. Lena stopped where she was. The husky did too. Daniel Frost stood beside the truck, adjusting something in the bed. He wore the same heavy coat, the same gloves, his movements efficient and unhurried. He did not look toward the cabin until he finished what he was doing. When he did not raise a hand. He simply waited. The space between them remained intact. Snow filled it, smooth and undisturbed. He did not cross it. She did not invite him to. After a moment, he set another crate down in the same place as before. The timing was precise. Not early, not late, as if it had always been scheduled that way. Daniel stepped back, returned to the truck, and drove off without starting at first. Gravity did some of the work. Lena stayed where she was until the sound faded. She brought the crate inside. This one was lighter. Inside were dry socks, fuel canisters, and a small bag of dog food. Still no note. Still no excess. That night, the stove burned steady. The husky slept closer to it than usual. Lena sat at the table, mending a tear in her jacket with slow, even stitches. Outside, the wind picked up, testing the walls, then moving on. The lamp cast a yellow circle that did not try to reach the corners. Somewhere beyond the trees, the road held the shape of two sets of tracks, already softening at the edges. Daniel Frost did not return that night. The quiet closed in, not as absence, but as structure. Inside the cabin, warmth held. Outside, Alaska continued, unchanged. And between those two states, a pattern had begun to take form, not as a promise, but as repetition. Daniel Frost woke before the light decided what kind of day it would be. The cabin he used was not large, but it held heat the way a good tool held an edge. Snow pressed against one wall where the wind favored it. The rest of the structure sat clean, squared, and quiet, a place chosen for function long before comfort became relevant. He rose without checking the time. He did not need to. His body already knew where the morning began. He ground coffee by hand, slow turns, steady pressure. The sound was small and precise, a rhythm that did not compete with the quiet. Water warmed on the stove. When it reached the right temperature, he poured it evenly, watching the surface bloom and settle. He drank standing by the window, not for the view but for the light. It was enough to know where the day stood. Breakfast was simple. Bread, sliced clean. Butter, softened but not melted. A single egg, cooked until the edge set and the center held. Everything placed on the plate with intention. Nothing added, nothing wasted. Luxury for Daniel had always been about removing what was unnecessary until only the essential remained. Outside, the cold waited. He layered in the same order each morning. Base wool, outer shell. Gloves checked for wear. Boots tightened once, not twice. The dogs stirred when they heard him open the door, 6 huskies rising in sequence, stretching, shaking off sleep. They knew the routine as well as he did. The sled stood ready, runners clean, lines coiled without knots. They moved as a unit once the harnesses were set. No shouting, no ruse. The dogs leaned into the pull, breath visible in short bursts as the sled slid forward. Daniel stood balanced, knees loose, hands steady on the bar. The trail led toward town first, a path worn into the snow by repetition, not traffic. The ride was smooth. The forest opened and closed around them in familiar sections. He adjusted weight on a bend without thinking. Capacity, once built, did not announce itself. At the edge of town, he slowed and guided the team off the main road. He unhooked them with the same order every time, checking pause, adjusting a strap that had shifted. One dog leaned into him, solid and warm. He rested his hand there for a moment longer than necessary, then moved on. He delivered supplies to the co-op first. Nothing unusual. A crate of dry goods. Fuel canisters stacked neatly where they would be taken later. The clerk nodded. Daniel nodded back. Names were not exchanged. They already existed. From there, he walked. The sled stayed locked by the post. He did not take it where it was not needed. He crossed the street and stepped into the hardware store, the bell announcing him without insistence. He picked up a box of nails, a coil of rope, gloves in a size he did not wear. He set them on the counter. The owner glanced at the gloves. Daniel did not explain. The transaction completed itself. Outside, a man struggled with a snowblower that had decided to stop cooperating. Daniel watched for a moment, then crossed the distance without comment. He knelt, adjusted a line, cleared ice from a joint that should not have been iced yet. The engine caught. The man exhaled, surprised. Daniel stood, brushed snow from his knees, and stepped back. No thanks was required. The work had already been done. By midday, the dogs were moving again, pulling the sled heavier now. Daniel guided them past the last building and onto the road that curved back into the trees. The town fell away behind him, replaced by open space and the long, quiet stretch that led toward Lena Harper's cabin. He slowed before the bend, as he always did. The crate rested in the sled, secured so it would not shift. He stopped at the same distance from the cabin each time, far enough to respect the boundary, close enough to be precise. He set the crate down where the snow was already compacted from earlier visits. Consistency mattered. Daniel did not approach the door. He checked the ground, ensuring no drift would push the crate out of place. He waited long enough to confirm the engine, sound from the generator inside, held steady. Then he turned back. On the return trip, the dogs settled into an easy pace. The light shifted, clouds thickening overhead. Daniel adjusted his route, avoiding a section where the snow had begun to crust over ice. Experience replaced calculation. When he reached his cabin again, the day had already begun to fold in on itself. He fed the dogs, cleaned the sled runners, hung his gear to dry. Inside, the stove took hold quickly. He sat at the table and made a short note in a leather-bound book, nothing elaborate. Just measurements. Weather. Time. Another day complete. Outside, the road held its shape for a while longer before the snow began to soften it again. Lena Harper did not change her routine to meet anyone. That was the first sign of safety. She came down the road on snowshoes just after mid-morning, the same hour she usually checked the far edge of her supply route. The sky had settled into a dull gray that did not threaten yet, but promised to later. Wind moved low, sliding along the ground instead of cutting through it. The kind of weather that required attention, not reaction. She carried a canvas bag over one shoulder. It swung once, then steadied. Nothing about her pace suggested urgency. Nothing suggested performance. Daniel Frost was at the co-op, loading a crate onto his sled when he noticed her. She did not approach him directly. She stopped a few yards away, far enough to keep the space intact. The dogs lifted their heads, alert but calm. Daniel rested a hand on the sled handle, not as a signal, simply as habit. Lena waited. When he looked up, she did not fill the silence. She raised the bag slightly, just enough to show its weight. "Your gloves," she said. 2 words. Functional. Finished. Daniel stepped closer, slow enough that the dogs did not shift. He recognized the gloves immediately. The ones he had placed on the counter days ago, without comment. They looked worn now. Not damaged, just used, which meant they had been needed. She set the bag on the sled instead of handing it to him. No forced proximity. No reach across a line. He nodded once. "Thanks." That was all. She did not ask his name. She did not ask why he came. She did not ask where he went when he left. The exchange concluded itself without closing remarks. Lena turned back toward the road the way she had come. The same direction, the same pace. The dogs watched her until she passed out of view, then settled again. Daniel finished securing the crate. The gloves went back into rotation without ceremony. He did not follow her. Later that afternoon, she arrived at the edge of his route again, this time near the place where the forest opened into a long, shallow clearing. Daniel was adjusting the sled lines, preparing to head out before the light dropped too far. She stopped at the same distance. As before, there was a pause, but not the kind that waited to be filled. "I cut across the ridge," she said, pointing with her chin. "Snow is thinner there." Information offered, not advice, not instruction. Daniel took it in. He adjusted the route in his head, checked the angle of the sky. "Good to know," he said. She nodded. That was enough. She did not stay to watch him leave. She did not look back. There were other signs, quieter ones. She did not step closer when he was distracted. She did not linger when the work was done. When the dogs shifted, she waited until they settled before speaking again, as if she understood that timing mattered to creatures that could not explain themselves. On the third encounter, days later, she brought nothing. That mattered too. She passed him on the trail as he walked the dogs back toward his cabin, the sled lighter now. She moved to the side without being asked. He did the same. The space widened, then closed, then widened again as they passed. "Storm tomorrow," she said, already moving past him, earlier than last week. Daniel glanced up at the sky, then back to her retreating shape. "Thanks," he said. She lifted one hand briefly. Not a wave, just acknowledgement. Some people, when they enter a life quietly, do not announce themselves with curiosity. They arrive with respect for what is already in place. That kind of presence did not demand explanation. It made room. By evening, the weather shifted exactly as she had said it would. Wind pressed harder against the cabin walls. Snow followed, light at first, then heavier, muting the world outside. Daniel secured the sled, fed the dogs, and checked the generator before the temperature dropped too far. Across the trees, Lena did the same. Inside her cabin, the stove held steady. The huskies slept near the door, not guarding it, just occupying the space where drafts like to slip through. Lena set water to heat and sat at the small table with a notebook open in front of her. She recorded the weather, the time, the depth of snow against the north wall. She did not write about the man with the sled. Outside, the road disappeared inch by inch. There are moments when safety does not announce itself as protection. It shows up as the absence of pressure, as someone who does not ask for more than is offered, as someone who leaves space untouched. Some people notice those moments. Others pass through them without language. The storm settled in for the night. Both cabins stayed warm. Both routines held. And somewhere between those parallel lives, without urgency or claim, a line of trust began to exist, not because it was declared, but because it was not violated. The first real contact happened without planning. It was late afternoon, the hour when the light flattened and distance became harder to read. Snow had fallen earlier, then stopped, leaving the ground soft but uneven. Daniel Frost was finishing a delivery run, sled lighter than it had been that morning. He slowed near the creek crossing, where ice liked to thin before anyone noticed. Lena Harper was already there. She stood on the opposite bank, snowshoes planted wide, a coil of rope resting at her feet. She had not called out. She had not stepped closer. She had simply waited until he saw her. Daniel stopped the dogs with a short signal. They settled without complaint, steam rising from their coats. The space between them held, clean and deliberate. The ice shifted, she said. One sentence. No warning tone. Daniel looked at the creek. He studied the surface, the way the light dulled where water moved underneath. I see it, he said. He did not advance. He did not ask her to move. He adjusted the sled lines, testing tension, recalculating weight. Lena picked up the rope and set it down closer to the bank, then stepped back again. Not an offer, just an option placed where it could be reached. Daniel nodded once. He crossed slowly, dogs pulling a reduced pace. The sled dipped, then leveled. When the runners touched solid ground again, he exhaled through his nose, a sound lost to the air. Thanks, he said. Lena tilted her head slightly. That was all. They did not linger. The dogs moved on. Lena waited until the sound faded before turning back toward her trail. Later, the weather pressed in again. Wind came down harder after sunset, pushing snow against the cabins in uneven bursts. Daniel finished securing his equipment and brought the dogs inside the shelter, checking paws, adjusting bedding. He was pouring water into the bowls when he heard the knock. Not loud, not insistent. He paused long enough to make sure he had heard it. When he opened the door, Lena stood just beyond the threshold, coat zipped high, hood down despite the cold. She did not step forward. The huskies lifted their heads, but did not rise. I'm heading out, she said. Storm is turning. Daniel glanced past her, reading the sky by the way clouds stacked against the ridge. Road is worse past the bend, he said. 2 lines. No overlap. She nodded once. I will take the trees, she said. Daniel stepped back, not inviting, just making room. She did not enter. She adjusted her gloves and turned away. He watched until her shape merged with the dark. Inside, the cabin returned to its steady quiet. The dogs settled again. The stove held. The next morning brought clarity. Snow lay fresh and even, smoothing the ground into something almost forgiving. Daniel set out early, following the edge of the forest instead of the road, the dogs moving easily through familiar terrain. Near the clearing, he saw Lena again, this time kneeling beside a fallen branch that blocked part of the trail. She was clearing it without hurry. He slowed. I can take it, he said. She shook her head, already moving the last section aside. Almost done, she said. Daniel waited until she stepped back. Then he guided the sled through the gap. Appreciate it, he said. She wiped snow from her gloves against her coat. That trail drifts fast, she said. Silence returned between them. Not empty, just complete. They stood there for a moment longer than necessary, not facing each other directly. Both angled slightly toward the work that had just been finished. The dog shifted, eager to move. Daniel tightened his grip on the sled bar. Stay warm, he said. Lena met his eyes briefly. No ismite, no distance added. You too, she said. He moved on. She stayed where she was until the sound of the runners disappeared, then continued down her own path, snowshoes finding rhythm again. There was no question left hanging in the air. No attempt to name what had just occurred. It was contact, simple and contained, the kind that did not demand continuation, but did not refuse it either. 2 people had shared space, exchanged what was needed, and returned to their separate directions without loss. In Alaska, that counted as something. The first shift did not look like help. That was the point. It happened on a morning that began like the others, cold settling before light, wind pressing low against the trees. Lena Harper was already outside when Daniel Frost arrived, snow packed firm beneath her boots as she worked along the side of the cabin where the drift had grown higher overnight. She did not see him pull in. He stopped farther back than usual, engine cut before the last bend. The sled stayed with the dogs. He walked the remaining distance alone, steps measured so the snow did not announce him too early. He did not call out. By the time she noticed him, He was already lifting the shovel she had leaned against the wall. Lena straightened immediately. "That is fine," she said. 3 words. Flat. Finished. Daniel paused. He did not argue. He set the shovel back where it had been, handle turned the same way, blade resting exactly where the snow would not freeze around it. He stepped aside instead and picked up a length of loose trim that had fallen from the roofline sometime during the last storm. It was not broken, just displaced, the kind of thing that did not register as urgent until it failed later. He held it up slightly, not moving closer. "This came loose," he said. Lena looked at it, then at the roof, then back at him. "I will get it," she said. She reached for the ladder, already shifting the conversation away from his hands. Daniel did not follow. He stepped back 2 paces and waited. The ladder creaked once as she climbed. Snow fell in small sheets as she adjusted the trim and secured it again. The work took less than 5 minutes. When she came down, Daniel was still where she had left him. "Done," she said. He nodded. He did not comment on the cold. He did not mention the height. He did not say he could have done it faster. They stood there for a moment, the space between them restored. Then he did something else. Daniel walked past her, not toward the cabin, but around it. He followed the packed path she used, careful to place his boots where hers already were. He stopped near the back wall, where the snow met the base unevenly. Without a word, he knelt and pressed his glove against the seam where wind liked to work its way in. He tested the seal, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small roll of weather tape. He did not apply it. He sat on the snow beside the wall and stood. Lena watched him closely now. "You do not need to do that," she said. Daniel met her eyes, steady. "I'm not," he said. 2 lines, equal weight. He stepped back, leaving the tape untouched, and returned to the sled. Lena did not move until he was gone. She stared at the tape for a long second, then picked it up. She examined it, checked the expiration date, the width. Practical. Correct. Useful. She did not use it that day. She put it on the shelf inside, beside tools she trusted. Later, the wind rose. By afternoon, snow had begun to drift again, softer than before, piling where the trees broke its path. Lena worked through it steadily, finishing what she had planned and stopping when she reached the limit she had set for herself. When she returned inside, the tape was still on the shelf. She left it there. Daniel did not come back that evening. The next day, the shift continued. This time, it was the generator. It had not failed. Not yet. But its sound had changed, subtle enough to miss if you were not listening for it. Daniel heard it as he passed, the pitch off by a fraction, the rhythm uneven in a way that would matter later. He stopped again, farther back than the cabin, and listened. Lena was inside, sorting supplies. She heard the engine change, then stabilize. When she stepped outside, the generator was running smoothly, the cover replaced, the latch secured. Daniel stood several yards away, wiping his gloves against his coat. She walked toward him, stopping short. "You touched it," she said. Not accusation. Observation. "Yes," he said. She waited. "I adjusted the choke," he added. Silence followed. "That was not necessary," she said. Daniel did not respond immediately. He looked at the generator, then back at her. "Not today," he said. 1 sentence. Measured. She considered this. "I do not want you maintaining it," she said. Clear boundary. No apology. Daniel nodded once. "Understood," he said. He did not justify. He did not soften it. He did not try to earn permission retroactively. He turned and left. That night, Lena shut the generator off earlier than usual and listened as the cabin settled into deeper quiet. She checked the fuel line herself, ran her hand along the casing, confirmed what she already knew. The adjustment had been correct. She did not like that. The next morning, she used the tape. She sealed the seam where the wind had started to work its way in, careful not to over-apply, leaving room for movement when the temperature shifted again. Outside, the snow continued to fall, slow and persistent. Daniel arrived later than usual. He stopped even farther back this time, staying near the edge of the trees. He did not approach the cabin. He did not unload the sled. Lena noticed anyway. She walked out to the midpoint between them, then stopped. "I set a line," she said, gesturing toward the generator. "I handle it." Daniel nodded. "Fair," he said. She waited for something else. It did not come. You can clear the path, she added, pointing toward the section of trail that drifted fastest. If you want. She did not say please. She did not say need. Daniel accepted it as it was given. He took the shovel, cleared the section efficiently, leaving the edges clean and the center packed. When he finished, he returned the shovel to its place and stepped back. That is enough, she said. He stopped immediately. No protest. No extra pass. When he left, the work showed only what it was meant to show. A clear path. No signature. No improvement beyond function. The act had been small, unannounced, and when the next snowfall came, it erased most of it. Lena walked the path later, snowshoes finding the packed center easily. She adjusted her route slightly, then continued on. The question left behind was not about help. It was about restraint. And that question stayed. The space between them did not shrink. It shifted. That was harder to account for. After the first shift, Daniel Frost adjusted his timing. Not by much. 15 minutes earlier some days. 20 later on others. Enough to avoid overlap without making absence feel deliberate. He still followed the same route. He still stopped at the same distance. What changed was when Lena Harper noticed immediately. She always did. One morning, she stepped outside with a mug still warm in her hands and saw fresh tracks near the bend. Not his. Too light. Someone else had passed through earlier. By the time she reached the edge of the clearing, the road was empty again. Whatever had been placed there was already gone. She did not speed up. She did not slow down. She took the long way around instead, snowshoes pressing a new pattern into ground that would not remember it by afternoon. That afternoon, Daniel arrived to find the door closed. Not locked, just closed. He stopped where the packed snow ended and waited longer than usual. The generator hummed evenly. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, steady line. Everything suggested normal function. He set the crate down anyway. This one held less. Dry goods. A length of rope he had replaced on his sled and no longer needed. He placed it carefully, aligning it with the grain of the step so it would not tip if the wind shifted. He left. Inside, Lena heard the sound of his truck fade before she stood. She did not open the door right away. When she did, the cold rushed in fast, sharp enough to clear the room. She took the crate inside, checked the contents, and set the rope aside. She already had rope. This one was better, though. Tighter weave. Less give. She put it back in the crate. She returned it to the step. The next day, the rope was gone. So was he. The misalignment continued. Sometimes Daniel cleared the path before she woke. Other times, she had already packed it down herself by the time he arrived. Once, he left a shovel leaning against the shed, handle turned inward so it would not catch wind. Lena moved it immediately, setting it back in its place inside. When he returned that afternoon, the shovel was gone. He did not look for it. Another morning, Lena found the weather tape missing from the shelf. She assumed she had moved it and forgotten where. By evening, it was back, set exactly where it had been before, edge flush with the wood, label facing outward. She left it there. They spoke less, not because anything had gone wrong, but because there was no longer a clear moment that belonged to both of them at once. Their routines overlapped imperfectly, like gears set a fraction off. One day, snow fell harder than expected. Daniel arrived late, dogs pulling slower, sled heavier with supplies meant for town. He saw Lena at the edge of the trail, adjusting her bindings, movements quick but controlled. He slowed. She did not look up. By the time he reached the clearing, she was already moving away, path angled sharply toward the trees. He stopped, watching the distance grow until it became terrain again. He considered calling out. He did not. That evening, the wind rose early. Lena had just finished securing the last panel on the side of the cabin when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Daniel, standing where the path widened, hat pulled low, breath visible in the air. She had not expected him at that hour. Neither of them spoke. The generator coughed once, then steadied. Daniel shifted his weight, hands still at his sides. Lena waited. "I'll be done in a minute," she said. One line. Neutral. "I'm not waiting," he said. Two lines. Balanced. They stood there, the space between them filled with sound instead of words. Wind through branches. Snow sliding from the roof in a soft rush. the dogs shifting in their harnesses, sensing pause. Lena finished tightening the panel and stepped back. Daniel did not move closer. "I cleared the east section," he said, nodding toward the trail. "It drifts faster." She followed his gaze, then nodded once. "Thank you," she said. The words landed, but did not close the distance. Daniel turned to leave, then stopped. "The door," he said, not looking back. "Sometimes it catches." Lena glanced at the door frame, then at him. "I know," she said. That was all. He left. Later that night, she checked the door anyway. It did catch, just slightly, when the temperature dropped below 0. She adjusted the hinge with a single turn, enough to correct it without changing the feel. The next morning, the door opened smoothly. Daniel noticed. He did not comment. What remained unsaid began to carry more weight than what was exchanged. Not in tension, but in attention. Each detail was measured, then released. Some people, when things fall out of sync, rush to correct the rhythm. Others wait to see if the pause has something to offer. Out here, timing was not a mistake. It was information. There were moments, brief and unremarkable, when either of them could have stepped closer, asked a question, closed the gap with something simple. They did not. Instead, they allowed the distance to breathe. And in that breathing space, something steady began to take shape. Not an answer, not a promise, just the quiet knowledge that alignment did not always mean proximity. Sometimes it meant allowing things to remain exactly as they were long enough to be understood. The next shift was quieter, but it moved something into place. It began with a line drawn on the ground. Lena Harper had marked it with the edge of her boot, a shallow groove in the snow that followed the side of the cabin from the door to the shed. Not a fence, not a warning, just a visible decision about where work happened and where it did not. Daniel Frost saw it as soon as he arrived. He stopped before crossing it. The dogs waited behind him, harnesses slack, breath slow. Daniel stood still long enough for the wind to settle, then set the crate down on his side of the line. He did not move it closer. Inside the crate were things she had not asked for. Not help, not comfort, only replacement parts. A belt for the generator she had mentioned once, weeks ago, when the sound had changed again. A spare filter. 2 fuel caps, identical, sealed. Lena came out and stopped at the door. She did not step over the line. "You do not need to bring parts," she said. Daniel nodded. "I know," he said. He waited. The space held. She looked down at the crate, then back at him. "I handle maintenance," she said. He did not disagree. "They are backups," he said. 2 lines. Clear. Contained. She considered that. "Leave them," she said. "There." She pointed to a spot near the shed, still on his side of the line. Daniel adjusted the crate exactly as indicated. That was the shift. Not closeness. Not retreat. Precision. Later that day, the wind picked up again. Snow moved sideways, blurring distance, flattening sound. Lena worked through it, finishing early, stopping when visibility dropped below what she trusted. When she returned inside, she noticed the crate again through the window, still where it had been left. Snow beginning to gather along the edges, already softening its outline. She did not bring it in. She left it for the storm. That night, the temperature dropped fast. The generator held, then hesitated, then steadied. Lena listened, counted the seconds between cycles, and decided not to touch it yet. She made soup instead. The next morning, the crate had been moved. Not closer to the cabin. Farther. It sat under the overhang of the shed roof now, protected from direct snowfall, but still outside. The parts inside would stay dry without crossing the line she had drawn. Daniel had come and gone early. She saw the tracks. One set in, one set out. No pause near the door. That afternoon, she crossed the line for the first time. Not to reach the crate. To clear snow that had drifted unevenly near the shed, blocking her usual path. She worked quickly, then returned to her side without comment. Daniel arrived later than usual, dogs tired, sled lighter. He saw the cleared section and stopped. "You did not have to," he said. "I needed access," she said. They stood there, the line between them softened now by footprints from both directions. "I will clear the west side tomorrow," he said. She did not answer immediately. "That side is mine," she said. He accepted it without pause. "Understood," he said. Another boundary set. Another accepted. The following days settled into a new pattern. Daniel cleared only what she indicated. Lena stopped moving things he left in neutral spaces. Tools appeared, then disappeared, always returned to function, never to display. Once, Daniel left a thermos on the crate. Not offered, not handed over, just placed there. Lena noticed it hours later. She did not drink it. She brought it back to the edge of the line and set it down, empty, rinsed clean, lid secured. No note. No thanks. Daniel took it the next time he came. Nothing was said. Small trust grew the way Alaska allowed it. Through repetition. Through restraint. Through attention to what did not belong to you. On the 5th morning after the line was drawn, the generator failed. Not catastrophically. Just enough. The sound cut out mid-cycle, leaving the cabin too quiet, the kind of quiet that required action. Lena stepped outside immediately, checking the fuel line, the intake, the casing. She knew the fix. She also knew it would take longer than the daylight she had left. Daniel arrived while she was working. He stopped well back. She did not look up. I am aware, she said. I hear it, he said. She finished tightening the bolt and stepped away. I can restart it, she said. I will. Daniel did not move. There is a spare belt, he said, nodding toward the shed. She followed his gaze. She had not opened the crate yet. I will replace it, she said. Tomorrow. The wind cut sharper then, pushing snow into her face. Daniel waited, watching the light thin. Tonight will drop below -10, he said. She knew. She also knew the line. Stand there, she said, pointing to a spot just inside the shed door. Do not touch anything. Daniel stepped exactly where she indicated. She retrieved the belt herself, replaced it with practiced movements, hands steady despite the cold. When she finished, she restarted the generator. The sound returned, even and reliable. She stepped back. Daniel did not comment. You can clear the east path now, she said. He nodded. That was the trust. Not permission to fix. Permission to remain. They did not stand closer after that. But the line in the snow was gone by morning, erased by weather and use, replaced by something less visible and more exact. A shared understanding of where one person ended and where the other was allowed to begin. Movement returned in small ways, never enough to announce itself. It began with sound. A distant engine, thin and uneven, reached the tree line one afternoon and then disappeared again. Not close enough to locate. Not loud enough to follow. Lena Harper paused mid-step, listening, then continued stacking wood where she had stopped. Alaska carried noises the way it carried weather. Most of them passed through without staying. Daniel Frost heard it too, later, as he guided the dogs along the ridge. He adjusted his route slightly, angling toward higher ground, not to investigate, only to keep the sled on firmer snow. The sound did not return. That night, the routine held, but it felt different. Lena cooked earlier than usual. She left the door open a few inches longer after bringing in water, letting cold settle along the floor before shutting it out. The husky lifted its head, then rested it again. Outside, snow moved softly, not falling, just rearranging itself. The next morning, a small disruption arrived. A man stood at the edge of the road near town, snowmobile stalled, hood open, gloves off despite the cold. He waved when Daniel approached, then stopped waving as soon as Daniel slowed the sled. Daniel did not dismount immediately. You need fuel, he said. The man nodded. He did not ask for a ride. He did not explain. Daniel handed him a canister from the sled, set it down, and waited. The man poured it carefully, hands shaking, then closed the hood and stepped back. The engine caught on the second pull. Appreciate it, the man said. Daniel nodded once. He did not follow when the snowmobile moved on. Later, the fuel canister was empty again, returned to its place, cap tight. No dent formed. The routine repeated, but it had changed shape. Daniel began arriving closer to dusk instead of mid-morning. Lena noticed the light on the snow before she noticed him. The way shadows stretched differently when the sun dropped lower. She adjusted her own schedule without naming it, finishing outdoor work earlier, leaving tasks that required warmth for later. One afternoon, she found a radio on the crate. Not new. Old. The kind with a cracked dial, and a battery compartment held shut by tape. It was turned off. She picked it up, tested the weight, then set it back down. When Daniel returned the next day, the radio was gone. That evening, a voice came through the static. Not directed at her. Not even clear. Just fragments. Coordinates. Weather. A call answered by someone else, then lost again. Lena listened long enough to know the radio worked, then turned it off and placed it on the shelf beside the weather tape. She did not mention it. The near rescue came without warning. It was not dramatic. The snow had crusted over after a brief thaw, leaving a surface that looked solid until it was not. Lena was crossing a shallow dip behind the cabin when one snowshoe broke through, sinking fast, twisting her balance. She caught herself before the second step followed, heart rate shifting just enough to notice. She did not call out. She tested the surface with the pole, moved slowly, found a safer angle, and climbed out without falling. Daniel saw the tracks later. Not the break, just the hesitation, the way the pattern changed for a few feet before returning to normal. He followed them with his eyes, then looked up toward the dip. When he arrived the next day, he stopped farther back than usual. "You should reroute there," he said, nodding toward the trees. "For now, one line." She followed his gaze. "I already did," she said. "2 lines. Even." He nodded. The dip remained untouched after that, snow drifting back into place, erasing the moment entirely. Another satellite appeared. A package arrived at the co-op addressed to Daniel Frost. The clerk mentioned it casually when Daniel stopped in for supplies. No return address. Heavy. Daniel did not open it there. He took it back to his cabin, set it on the table, and left it unopened for 2 days. When he finally did, the content stayed out of sight. Only one thing changed afterward. The sled was lighter on his next run. Nothing else shifted. Lena did not ask. Her routine continued, but it was no longer solitary. Not shared, just aware. She found herself pausing at the edge of the clearing more often, not to wait, but to check the sky in 2 directions instead of 1. She began carrying the rope Daniel had returned earlier, coiled differently now, easier to deploy if needed. Daniel noticed the rope. He did not comment. One evening, the wind came up fast. Snow moved sideways, visibility dropping before either of them expected it. Daniel had just cleared the east path when the first gust hit hard enough to push against the shoulder. He adjusted the dogs, preparing to turn back. Lena stepped out of the cabin then, scanning the tree line. Their eyes met across the space. "Stay put," she said. He did. She walked out to the marker she had set weeks ago, drove it deeper into the snow, and returned without hurrying. "Better now," she said. He waited until the gust passed, then nodded. No rescue had occurred. No one had needed saving. The storm moved on as quickly as it had arrived. That night, both cabins stayed lit later than usual. Daniel sat at his table, writing measurements, then closing the book without finishing the line. Lena sat by the stove, radio silent, listening to the wind fade. The routines repeated again the next day, but they were no longer parallel. They moved like satellites, circling the same center without touching, influenced by distance, altered by small forces that never asked permission. Nothing had been resolved. Nothing had been claimed. Yet the quiet held. More motion than before, and the space between them carried the shape of something that had almost happened and might, under different timing, happen again. The cost showed up quietly. It did not arrive as danger or damage. It arrived as delay. Daniel Frost missed town that morning. The wind had turned earlier than forecast, pushing snow across the lower road and softening the packed sections he relied on to move quickly. He adjusted his route twice, then once more, each change costing minutes he could feel but not measure yet. By the time he reached the ridge, the light had shifted enough to tell him he would not make the co-op before closing. He stopped anyway. The dog slowed, breath steady, waiting for direction. Daniel checked his watch for the first time that day, then looked toward the town road, disappearing under drifting snow. He turned the sled back. The errand would wait. That choice followed him home. Inside the cabin, he inventoried supplies out of habit. Fuel was fine. Food was fine. Time was not. The delivery he had planned for the next morning would need to move forward. The radio sat silent on the shelf, turned off. He left it there. Across the trees, Lena Harper felt the consequence differently. She had planned to melt snow that afternoon, enough to last 3 days. When the wind rose, she delayed it, choosing instead to secure the west side of the cabin before the drift deepened. By the time she returned inside, the light had dropped too far to work efficiently. She melted less than planned. That night, the stove burned lower than usual. Not dangerously, just enough to notice. She layered another blanket and adjusted the damper a fraction, trading heat for duration. In the morning, the generator hesitated again. It did not fail. It caught on the second cycle, then steadied. Lena listened, counted the seconds, and shut it down earlier than she preferred. Fuel would last longer that way. Heat would not. She stepped outside to clear the path and saw Daniel's track stop short of the usual point. He had not come all the way. That was new. She did not follow the tracks. She finished her work and returned inside, leaving the door closed longer than she had been lately. Later, Daniel arrived. Not with the sled. On foot. The dog stayed behind, secured. At the edge of the trees, Daniel walked the remaining distance carrying a small pack, steps slower than usual, boots breaking through the crust in uneven rhythm. He stopped where the path ended, farther from the cabin than he had been in weeks. "I did not make town," he said. One line. No explanation. Lena stood in the doorway, gloved hands resting at her sides. "I know," she said. She did not ask how. She did not ask why. Daniel shifted his weight. "I have extra fuel," he said. She looked at the pack. "Not today," she said. "Boundary. Clear." He nodded. "I can clear the north drift," he said. She considered the light, the slope of the ground, the way the wind had worked the snow into a shape that would take time to undo. "It will drift again tonight," she said. "Yes," he said. Silence followed. "I will handle it tomorrow," she added. Daniel accepted that without pause. "Understood," he said. He did not turn away immediately. He stood where he was, looking past her toward the chimney, the thin line of smoke rising slower than usual. "You are burning low," he said. Observation, not judgment. "I am," she said. Another silence. "I will bring fuel tomorrow," he said. She met his eyes. "You will leave it by the shed," she said. He nodded once. When he left, his pace was slower than before. The dogs greeted him with quiet impatience, sensing the shortened run. He adjusted the harnesses, then turned back without looking toward the cabin again. That night, the temperature dropped further than expected. Daniel woke once to check the stove, adding a split log he had planned to save for later. It burned down faster than he liked. He adjusted the damper and went back to sleep without fully warming the room. Lena woke too. The cold pressed harder against the floor, seeping into the edges. She stood, added a log, then removed it again, choosing a smaller one instead. She sat at the table until the heat stabilized, hands wrapped around a mug that had already gone cold. In the morning, the fuel arrived. 2 cans. Not full. Not empty. Enough. They sat under the shed overhang, positioned so snow would not bury the caps. Daniel had placed them there before dawn. The tracks showed he had not approached the door. Lena moved one. Ken inside. She left the other where it was. That afternoon, she cleared the north drift herself. It took longer than usual. The snow was heavier, the crust thicker. She stopped twice to catch her breath, measuring effort against daylight. When she finished, Daniel arrived at the edge of the clearing. "You did not need to," he said. "I chose to," she said. He nodded. "I will still clear the east path," he said. She did not respond immediately. "Later," she said. Another small adjustment. The cost lingered. Daniel made town the next day, but later than planned. One delivery shifted. Another waited. Nothing urgent. Nothing lost. Just time rearranged. Lena melted snow again, finishing after dark. She slept deeper that night, waking later than usual, routine flexed but intact. Neither of them spoke about the cold. Neither of them spoke about the delay. But both adjusted. The relationship did not move forward in warmth or closeness. It moved through consequence, through the quiet understanding that every action carried weight, even when it was small, even when it was meant well. And that weight, once felt, did not push them apart. It made them more precise. Daniel Frost changed one thing. He did not announce it. He did not explain it. He simply did not do what he had always done. The morning broke clear after a week of low cloud, the kind of clarity that made distances honest. Snow held firm underfoot. The temperature sat just below zero, cold enough to keep the surface reliable, warm enough to move without fighting it. Daniel rose early, as usual, dressed in the same order, checked the dogs, secured the sled. Then he left the sled where it was. He took only a small pack and walked. The trail he chose cut away from Lena Harper's cabin sooner than before, bending toward the trees instead of following the open line that would bring him within sight of her door. It was not a longer route. It was not shorter. It simply did not pass where it used to. When he reached the clearing near the ridge, he stopped and set the pack down. Inside were two items he had carried for weeks without using. A spare filter, a folded map with hand-marked notes that no longer needed updating. He removed the filter, set it on a rock where it would stay dry, then folded the map once more and placed it back in the pack. He left the filter there. He did not check the wind. He did not look back. Across the trees, Lena noticed the absence before she noticed anything else. She had stepped outside to split wood, rhythm steady, breath controlled. The path beyond the clearing remained untouched. No fresh tracks angled toward her line. No sound of dogs settling. No crate set down where it usually appeared. She paused once, then resumed her work. Later, she crossed the clearing and found the filter on the rock. She recognized it immediately, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it was exactly the kind of thing Daniel would have left before. The difference was where it had been placed. Not near her shed, not under the overhang, not positioned for her to take without thought. It was off the path. She picked it up, checked the seal, and weighed it in her hand. Useful, necessary, eventually, not urgent. She did not bring it inside. She placed it in the storage box near the trail marker, the one she used for items meant to be shared without being exchanged. She closed the lid and brushed snow from the top until it looked untouched. That afternoon, Daniel passed through town later than usual. He did not stop at the co-op. He went to the hardware store instead and bought only what he needed for his own repairs. No extras, no sizes he did not wear. He nodded to the owner, paid, and left. Outside, a man struggled with a loose chain on a truck tire. Daniel slowed, then kept walking. The man fixed it himself. The dogs waited longer than they were used to that evening. Daniel fed them, cleaned the runners, and hung his coat to dry. He sat at the table with his leather-bound book open, wrote one line, then closed it without adding anything else. The radio stayed off. The next day, the weather shifted again. Snow moved in bands, visibility thinning and clearing in cycles. Lena adjusted her route twice, choosing trees over open ground, shortening her work window. When she returned to the cabin, she found the east path already packed. Not freshly cleared. Packed. The difference mattered. Daniel stood at the far edge of the clearing, hands empty, dogs behind him. "I used a ridge," he said. "One line." She nodded. "That holds better," she said. "Two lines." They did not step closer. She turned back toward the cabin. He turned toward the trees. The distance between them remained intact, but it no longer felt like something that needed managing. Later, Lena moved the storage box closer to the trail marker. Not to her door, not away from it, just closer to where decisions happened. She placed the filter inside the cabin that evening, setting it on the shelf beside the weather tape and the radio. She did not use it. Daniel did not bring another. The realization did not show itself in words. It showed up in absence, in restraint, in a choice not to intervene where intervention had once felt automatic. Some people arrive with capacity and mistake it for permission. Others learn, slowly, that presence does not require proximity, and help does not require insertion. When Daniel altered his route again the following morning, he left the clearing entirely, choosing a path that circled wide and rejoined the road beyond sight. He did not check whether Lena noticed. She did. She adjusted nothing. That was the respect. A quiet shift had taken place, not toward closeness, not toward distance, but toward alignment. Not of schedules, but of understanding. Out here, realization did not need to be spoken to be real. It showed itself in what was no longer done. And in that absence, space opened. Not empty, just available. The routine returned the way it always had. Quietly, without asking whether anything had changed. Morning came pale and even, light spreading across the snow without edge or urgency. The temperature held steady, cold enough to preserve the surface, warm enough to move without resistance. Alaska kept its balance. Lena Harper woke at the same hour she always had, but she did not reach for the kettle first. She checked the door. It opened smoothly, no catch, no hesitation. She closed it again and set water on the stove. Coffee followed, measured by feel, poured by habit. The husky lifted its head, then settled back down, tail brushing the floor once. Outside, the path waited. She stepped into her boots and went out, breath steady, shoulders relaxed. The east trail was packed. The north drift had softened overnight. She adjusted her route without thinking about who had cleared what, only where it held. She split wood next, but she stacked it differently, rotating the pile so the older pieces sat closer to the wall. Same work, different order. Across the trees, Daniel Frost began his morning the same way he always had. He rose before light, dressed in layers, ground coffee by hand. The kettle sang briefly, then quieted. He ate standing, plate cleared without pause. The dogs stirred, alert but unhurried. He harnessed them in silence. The sled moved when he asked it to, runners clean, lines steady. He took the ridge route, the one he had chosen days ago and not revisited since. It brought him through familiar ground without crossing the clearing near Lena's cabin. He did not slow there. He did not look. The dogs carried on, breath visible, pace even. Later, he stopped near the marker she had placed weeks ago, the one that defined where paths turned and decisions changed. He checked the storage box beside it. The lid sat flush. No snow disturbed around the edges. He left it closed. In town, the co-op opened on time. Daniel arrived on time. He picked up what he needed and nothing else. He nodded to the clerk, paid, and left. The hardware store bell rang once when he entered, once when he exited. Outside, someone asked him for the time. He answered, nothing more. Back at the cabin, Lena melted snow and cooked early. She listened to the radio for 10 minutes, then turned it off. She replaced the filter in the generator, hands steady, movements efficient. When she finished, she wiped the casing clean and shut the cover. She did not test it twice. She left the spare parts where they belonged, not closer, not farther. Just correct. Daniel returned later than usual, dogs tired, sled lighter. He stopped at the edge of the trees, unhooked the team, and let them rest. He cleared a short section of trail where the wind had begun to carve a groove, then stopped before the work became unnecessary. He did not continue to the cabin. The distance held, but it no longer required attention. That evening, the light faded slowly, the sky stretching color thin across the horizon before settling into gray. Smoke rose from both chimneys, separate lines, steady and contained. Inside her cabin, Lena sat at the table and made notes about the weather. Not more than usual, just enough. She closed the notebook and set it aside before finishing the page. Inside his cabin, Daniel closed his book earlier than he normally would have. He left the radio off and let the quiet stand on its own. The same steps had been taken. They were simply no longer in the same order. Alaska remained unchanged. The snow did not care who had learned what. The wind moved where it always did. The trees held their ground. But the routines, repeated now with restraint instead of anticipation, carried a different weight. Not heavier, more precise. And in that precision, both lives settled back into their paths. Parallel once more, not because nothing had happened, but because what had happened no longer needed to be managed. The last change did not arrive with sound. It arrived with light. Spring did not announce itself in Alaska. It adjusted the edges. Snow softened during the day and held again at night. Water traced new paths along the ground, finding places that had always been there, but had never mattered before. The land stayed quiet. The work stayed the same. Lena Harper noticed the difference in the morning. She stepped outside and saw a thin line of dark earth where snow had pulled back from the cabin wall. She knelt, pressed her glove into the soil, and stood again. Nothing needed doing yet. That mattered. She carried on. The husky followed at a slower pace now, stopping to sniff places that had been sealed all winter. Lena let it. The path she took bent slightly away from the trees, then returned. Same distance, different shape. Across the ridge, Daniel Frost stopped using the sled before it became unnecessary. He walked more. The dogs ran without pulling, harnesses loose, breath easy. He left earlier some mornings, later on others. The route remained familiar, but he no longer measured it against anything else. When he passed the clearing, he did not slow. When he passed the marker, he glanced once, then kept moving. The storage box remained closed. One afternoon, Lena found a new object where the snow had receded fully. A small sapling, no more than 2 feet tall, wrapped at the base to protect its roots. It had been placed between the cabin and the tree line, not close enough to interfere, not far enough to be forgotten. The soil around it had been pressed carefully, water pooled just enough to settle it. No marqueur, no note. She crouched, checked the roots, adjusted the wrap slightly, then stood. The tree would live or would not. Either way, it had been given a chance without being named. She did not look for Daniel. That evening, smoke rose from both chimneys again, thinner now, slower. The radio stayed off. The notebooks stayed closed. Supper came and went without hurry. Later, when darkness settled in fully, the path between the cabins remained untouched. No new tracks crossed it. No old ones were erased. The routine held, but it no longer circled itself. It moved forward. Out here, some things did not need to be completed to be whole. A line could exist without being drawn. A boundary could remain without being enforced. A presence could be felt without arriving. Daniel passed the sapling the next day on his return, noticed the soil had been adjusted, and continued on. Lena noticed the dogs had not approached it and smiled once, briefly, without reason. Alaska did not soften. It did not reward. It did not explain. But it allowed space for people who learned when to act and when to leave things as they were. In places like this, care showed up as timing. Respect showed up as distance. Trust showed up as what was not taken, not crossed, not claimed. Some stories did not end. They simply reached a place where nothing needed fixing. The cabin stayed warm. The paths stayed clear. The tree stood between them, small and alive, asking nothing. Night came again, slow and even. And if someone passed through later, the marks would still be there. The quiet would still be here, waiting without demand,